You know what she said to him that night? I heard every word of it through the old cast-iron register in the floor of my study, the one the builder put in back in 1962, when the house was first laid out. Crystal clear, like she was standing 3 feet away. Your father's become a problem, Nigel. He's sitting on land worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes, and he's not doing a bloody thing with it. If we don't sort this soon, he'll leave the whole lot to some rescue trust or the church down the road, and we'll walk away with the shirts on our backs. Nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. And my son, my own flesh and blood, the boy I taught to cast a fly rod on the Matora when he was 6 years old, the kid who used to fall asleep on my chest watching the cricket test matches on the telly, that boy said, "All right. What do you want me to do?" And she said, "You know what needs doing. The hut at Glenorchy, this long weekend. Take him tramping out past the saddle. Old men get disoriented in the bush all the time. Nobody finds them till the melt. And by then there's nothing left but bones. No questions." That conversation took place on a Wednesday evening in early June, the start of our southern winter, with a southerly already howling down off the Remarkables and rattling every window on the north side of the house. I was standing in my study directly above the kitchen, listening through that register like a man at a confessional. A vent my wife Margaret and I had laughed about for 30-odd years, because you could hear everything the kids said downstairs when they thought you were out of earshot. We used it to catch Nigel sneaking biscuits after lights out when he was 9. Margaret used to say it was our best parenting tool. She had no idea that 4 decades later, that same strip of perforated iron would keep me breathing. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Let me walk you back properly. My name is Callum Whitley. I'm 68 years old, born and bred in Invercargill, though I've lived most of my adult life up in Queenstown, where my wife and I raised our children. For 31 years, I worked as a senior detective with the New Zealand Police. Most of that time attached to the Criminal Investigation Branch in Dunedin, and later heading up a cold case unit out of Christchurch. Murders, disappearances, fraud rings that crossed the Tasman, domestic violence cases where the truth was buried under 10 years of lies. I saw every shade of darkness a human being can carry inside them. I closed 387 cases in my career. I lost 9. I don't tell you this to crow about it. I tell you because it matters for what comes next. I know how people who've decided to hurt someone think. I know the pattern of their planning, the tells they cannot hide no matter how careful they believe they're being. And I know, perhaps better than almost anyone in this country, how to build a file that no defense barrister on earth is going to dismantle in front of a jury. I retired at 62. Margaret had passed 3 years before that. Breast cancer, caught late and aggressive. She went in the autumn. The job kept me upright for a while after, because a job like that gives you somewhere to put your grief. But eventually, even that wasn't enough, and I handed in my warrant card and walked out of the Christchurch station on a gray September afternoon without looking back. I retired to the place Margaret and I had always meant to end up, a 5-acre block on Lake Hayes just outside Queenstown, with the water on one side and the Tussock Hills climbing up toward Coronet Peak on the other. We'd bought the land in 1991 for what seemed like a king's ransom at the time, $340,000, and built the house ourselves over 2 summers, a long, low cedar place with a wraparound veranda and windows running the full length of the northern face so the sun poured in through winter mornings. By the time I retired, that property, land, and house together was valued at $4.2 million. Queenstown property doesn't go down. It never has. And on current form, it never will. I also kept the old family home in Invercargill, a brick villa on a 1/4-acre section in a leafy pocket of Windsor. 4 bedrooms, original native timber floors, lemon tree in the back that Margaret planted the year Nigel was born. That one came in at $900,000 according to the last rating valuation, which I suspect was conservative. Between the two properties, my police superannuation, the investments I'd been quietly building since my late 30s, and a share portfolio Margaret's father had left us, I was worth somewhere in the region of $6.5 million New Zealand dollars all up. A comfortable position, by any standard you'd care to apply. More than comfortable. Margaret and I used to laugh about how the daft Invercargill boy with a second-hand bike had ended up sitting on a small fortune. She'd have had a field day with what came next. I have 2 children. My daughter Helena lives in Wellington with her husband Ben and their 2 boys, aged 9 and 11. Helena is a pediatrician at Wellington Hospital. She rings me every Sunday evening without fail, usually around 6:30, just after she's put the boys in the bath. She sends the kids down to stay with me at Lake Hayes every January school holidays. In 28 years of adulthood, she has never once asked me about the will, about what she's inheriting, about any of it. Not a single time. Helena earns a good living, loves her work, and seems genuinely content with her family. That tells you what you need to know about my daughter. Then there's Nigel. Nigel is 41. Bright boy, once upon a time. He had charm and energy, could talk the bark off a tree when he was in the right mood. He read commerce at Otago, set up a boutique property development firm in Auckland in his late 20s. And for a while things looked promising. He did a couple of apartment blocks in Parnell and Ponsonby, made decent returns, bought himself a big house in Grey Lynn. Then the market shifted in 2020. Interest rates climbed, his partners pulled out of a major project in Takapuna, and the whole lot went pear-shaped inside 18 months. By 2023, he was functionally broke. The Grey Lynn house was sold at mortgagee auction. The partners wanted nothing to do with him, and that was when he turned up one day with Priscilla on his arm. Priscilla Laurent, 37 years old, originally from Hawke's Bay, former real estate agent, former model according to her, former a great many things if you dug into her background, which I eventually did. Glossy, polished, the kind of woman who knows exactly how to fix her gaze on a man and make him feel like he's the only person in the room. She also had 2 bankruptcy notices filed against her previous business ventures, a harassment complaint lodged by a former employer in 2019 that was quietly dropped, and a trail of online breadcrumbs suggesting she'd gone through 2 previous long-term relationships with older wealthy men, both of which had ended in civil disputes over money. Nigel married her 5 months after they met. Didn't tell me, didn't invite me, or Helena. They signed the paperwork at a registry office in Ponsonby and rang me afterwards, already on honeymoon in Fiji. The first time I met her was at Christmas 2023, when they drove down from Auckland to Lake Hayes. She walked through my front door, looked at the view across the lake, and said, "Callum, this place is absolutely stunning. What would something like this be worth on the current market? Not lovely to finally meet you. Not Nigel's told me so much about you. The market valuation, inside the first 30 seconds. 31 years in the job. You learn to read people the way a farmer reads weather. I knew exactly what had walked into my house that afternoon. But Nigel was looking at her like she'd hung the Southern Cross in the sky herself, and she was his wife. And I loved my son. So I held my tongue. That was my first mistake. And I'm not too proud to admit it. In February of 2024, Nigel rang me from Auckland. His voice was pinched, almost shaking. He and Priscilla had been served with an eviction notice from their rental. The creditors were closing in from every direction. Could they come and stay with me? Just temporarily, until he found his feet? Yes, I said. Of course, yes. He was my boy. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon in a hired van. Priscilla brought 17 suitcases. 17, I counted. For what Nigel had described on the phone as a couple of months, tops. She also brought a long-haired cat named Monsieur Poirot, that developed an immediate and urgent habit of sleeping on Margaret's cashmere throw. The one I kept folded on the back of the armchair by the wood burner. She knew what that throw meant. I told her the first evening. She kept letting the cat sleep on it anyway. The first month was manageable. Nigel was making calls, chasing leads, talking about starting over with a smaller consultancy. Priscilla was redecorating the spare suite at my expense, casually adding things to the household shopping list at New World, like $200 bottles of Central Otago Pinot and $300 scented candles from an importer in Auckland. I said nothing. I should have. By the second month, the energy had shifted. Nigel slept till midday. Priscilla started making small comments at dinner, innocent sounding on the surface but weighted underneath. One evening, over a shepherd's pie I'd spent half the afternoon making, she said, "You know, Callum, a place like this must be such a burden at your age. All these stairs, the drive into town, the winters. Have you ever thought about moving into one of those retirement villages in Arrowtown? Much safer. You'd hardly notice the change." I looked at her across the table and smiled the smile I used to use on suspects who thought they were being clever. "I appreciate the concern, Priscilla, but I built these stairs with my own hands. I think I'll manage them a while longer." She smiled back. Her eyes didn't. By the fourth month, things were being moved. Small things. A paper in my filing cabinet, slightly out of order. The bottom drawer of my desk not shut, quite flush the way I always left it. I used to place a single strand of cotton across the gap of certain drawers. An old surveillance habit I'd picked up on a white-collar job back in the 90s. The cotton had been dislodged on 3 separate occasions inside a fortnight. Someone was going through my personal records, my bank statements, my estate documents. Then one afternoon in late April, I came back early from a dentist appointment in town and heard Priscilla's voice from the kitchen, on speakerphone to someone. She thought I was gone for the afternoon, she said quite plainly. "He's got to have a will somewhere in that house. If we can get sight of it before anything happens, we know exactly where we stand. Otherwise, we're shooting in the dark." Those words sat in my gut like cold lead. Before anything happens. I didn't confront her. A detective with any instinct never tips his hand before the file is built. Instead, I went into planning mode, the way I had on every serious case I'd ever worked. Methodical. Unhurried. Step by step. The first call I made was to Tom Rangihow, a retired CIB inspector I'd worked alongside for 20-odd years, now living on a lifestyle block out past Cromwell. Tom was a quiet, steady man with 3 adult sons of his own. I told him what I suspected. He didn't flinch. "Build it like a case, Cal," he said. "Your house. Your rules." New Zealand is a one-party consent jurisdiction when it comes to recording conversations. You can lawfully record any conversation you're a party to, and under certain circumstances, you can record activity in your own home where you have reasonable grounds to believe a serious offense is being planned or committed. I knew the law cold, but it was good to hear Tom say it out loud. I bought the surveillance gear through a firm in Christchurch that I'd used before on a private matter. Small wireless cameras, the size of a 20-cent piece, disguised inside smoke detectors, picture frames, a ceramic kiwi ornament on the mantelpiece that had been Margaret's grandmother's, audio pickups near the register vents, which, as I've said, carried sound through that house like a tin can on a string. The total came to $4,600. Best money I ever spent. Next, I rang my solicitor, Annette Fitzgerald, who'd been looking after my estate matters for close to 15 years. Annette is sharp, unsentimental. The kind of lawyer who reads your facial expression the way I used to read suspects. I asked her to draft 2 documents. The first was a new and genuine will, leaving 70% of my estate to Helena and her boys in trust, 20% to the Alzheimer's Society of New Zealand, in Margaret's memory, and 10% to a scholarship fund at the University of Otago for the children of serving police officers. Nigel was to receive nothing, not a dollar, not a dining chair. He'd had more chances than I could count. The second document was a decoy will. This one was designed specifically to be discovered. It left the Invercargill house and 60% of my liquid assets to Nigel and Priscilla jointly. I placed that one in the precise drawer of my filing cabinet where the cotton thread kept being disturbed. 3 days later, the thread was moved again. And that same evening at dinner, I noticed something I hadn't seen from Priscilla in months. She was smiling. A real smile. The particular kind of smile a poker player smiles when they think they've drawn the winning hand and nobody else at the table has noticed. The bait had been taken. Over the following weeks, the cameras and the audio recorders built me a case that would have made my old prosecutor friends in Dunedin weep with joy. Priscilla going through my medicine cabinet, photographing every prescription bottle with her phone. Nigel at 2 in the morning on his laptop, searching things like, how long does probate take in New Zealand? Can a will be contested on mental capacity grounds? And symptoms of early onset dementia in men in their late 60s. Priscilla ringing what turned out to be a struck-off solicitor in Auckland, asking about whether a power of attorney could be backdated. The two of them in the kitchen arguing over pacing, Priscilla telling Nigel he was being weak, reminding him that they were living on his father's charity like beggars, telling him there was $6.5 million sitting right there within reach, and they were behaving like children about it. Nigel, to my great and lasting sorrow, said very little to push back. He asked once, "What if we just ask him to help us with a deposit on a place in Wanaka?" He'd probably say yes. And she said, "A deposit. Nigel, can you hear yourself? Why would we take a crumb when the whole loaf is sitting there?" I listened to that recording in my study late that night with a pair of headphones on. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel panic. I felt the cold, clean clarity I used to feel at the exact moment a complex case came together in my head. The moment you know the shape of it, and you absolutely know, that you're going to close it. They were going to make a move. When they did, I'd be ready. The pattern I'd seen 100 times in my career held true here, too. People who've decided to hurt someone always escalate. Priscilla and Nigel began with snooping. Then, it was research. Then came the credit cards. In May, I noticed unauthorized charges on a backup card I'd given Nigel years earlier for genuine emergencies. $41,000 over 10 weeks. A diamond bracelet from a jeweler on Queen Street. A week in a luxury lodge on Waiheke Island. A $12,000 watch. Designer clothing. Expensive dinners. A trip to Melbourne for a weekend. I didn't cancel the card. I downloaded every statement and forwarded them to Annette. Then came the solicitor approach. In late May, Annette rang me midweek. A man named Gerald Hobbs had contacted her office, claiming to be my new legal representative, requesting my file be transferred into his care. Annette, bless her, rang me inside 10 minutes. I'd never heard of Hobbs. Tom Rangihau made a few phone calls and came back within a day. Hobbs had been struck off the roll in 2017 for misappropriation of client funds. His mobile records, which Tom got sight of through a former colleague, showed 23 calls to Priscilla's number in the previous month. 23. They were trying to get hold of my will through a crook so they could put a fraudulent replacement in front of it. I added that to the file. The file had become a binder by this stage. Then a second binder. Then a full shelf. And then came the first week of June. The conversation through the register. The southerly rattling the windows. The hut at Glenorchy. Make it look like he got lost in the bush. The following morning, a Thursday, Nigel came down to breakfast with a cheerful grin on his face and said, "Dad, how about the two of us head up to the hut at the long weekend? Just us blokes. We haven't done a proper tramp together in years. I reckon you'd enjoy it." I looked at him across the kitchen bench, this boy I'd raised. This man who was now plotting to leave my corpse in a schist gully at the head of the Reese Valley, and I said, "That sounds lovely, son. I'd love that." Because here's what Nigel did not know. I'd been preparing for this conversation for 18 weeks. The hut at Glenorchy was mine. I'd owned it outright since 1998, and 2 weeks earlier I'd arranged to have discreet cameras installed throughout the common areas by the same Christchurch firm. Tom Rangihow was already booked into a DOC backcountry hut 2 valleys over, with a satellite phone and a night vision kit. Annette was holding my real will in a security box at her Queenstown office, with sealed instructions to release everything to Helena in the event of anything happening to me. And Detective Sergeant Rebecca Tuho of the Queenstown CIB, a young officer I'd mentored 10 years ago who now ran the local section, had been fully briefed. She had a search warrant ready to execute on my word. Everything was in place. The snare was set. We drove up to Glenorchy on the Friday afternoon, just the 2 of us, along that winding lake edge road out of Queenstown that I've driven 1,000 times in every kind of weather. Nigel was talkative on the way, more animated than he'd been since he and Priscilla moved in. Talked about the Warriors, talked about a restaurant in Queenstown he wanted to try once we got back. Talked about how spectacular the country was this time of year with the first snow on the Remarkables. Small talk. The kind of small talk you make with your father when you are pretending everything is normal and you are simultaneously preparing to kill him. We got to the hut just on dusk. The temperature had already dropped to -2. A real southerly front was pushing up from Stewart Island, and the forecast was grim. 80-kilometer winds overnight. Heavy snow above 500 meters. Wind chill of -12 at the saddle. Ideal conditions. If what you wanted was for someone to disappear into the mountains and never be found. I cooked dinner. Hogget from a butcher in Frankton, kumara mash, silverbeet from Helena's garden that she'd sent down in a chili bin a week earlier. Nigel opened a bottle of Pinot. We ate at the cowrie table Margaret and I had bought from a craftsman in Motueka in 1999. Nigel told stories from university, from his OE in Europe when he was 23, from the time he and his flatmates had tried to tramp the Milford track in the wrong season and nearly come unstuck at Mackinnon Pass. He was warm, he was funny. He was the boy I remembered. And the entire time I knew exactly what was in the front pocket of his jacket, because Tom had told me. A small paper envelope containing a crushed tablet of Zopiclone at 5 times a normal therapeutic dose. Enough to put a man my size into a deep sleep for 6 to 8 hours. 6 to 8 hours of unconsciousness in a bush hut, with the fire dying, and the door left ajar to the southerly meant hypothermia. Hypothermia at those temperatures meant death. The coroner would write misadventure, and everyone would go home. After dinner, Nigel offered to make tea. He carried both mugs out from the hut's little kitchenette. I watched him on my phone via the camera I'd mounted above the hob. I watched him take the envelope from his jacket pocket. I watched him tap the powder into the mug on the left. Stir it, slowly, then stir it again to make sure it dissolved properly. I watched him bring the mugs through and place the left one in front of me with a small smile. "Here you go, Dad," he said. I lifted the mug to my lips. I did not drink. I'd spent 31 years in the police. I'd long since learned not to consume anything I hadn't poured myself when I was in a setting where I had even the smallest reason to be alert. I'd already ducked out to the toilet once before dinner and placed an identical mug of cold, unaltered tea in the cupboard where I could retrieve it. When Nigel excused himself to the bathroom about 20 minutes later, I stood up, tipped the drugged tea into a thermos that I had hidden behind the couch for exactly this purpose, and replaced it with the clean tea from the cupboard. By the time he came back and sat down, I was already yawning. "That Pinot's done me in," I said. "I might turn in early, mate. Feel free to keep the fire going a while." No worries, Dad. Get some rest. That same flat smile, those same empty eyes, watching me the way a predator watches a wounded animal. I went through to my room at the end of the hallway, closed the door, locked it, and waited. At 10 minutes past midnight, I heard footsteps come down the hall. The door handle turned again. Then there was a long pause. The footsteps retreated. 8 minutes later, they returned, and this time I heard the faint scrape of metal, a butter knife in the lock. It popped within 30 seconds. Through the camera disguised as a smoke detector above my bed, I watched my son enter the room. He stood over the bed and looked down at the shape under my duvet, a shape I had constructed from a weighted sleeping bag, stuffed with sand bladders I'd filled that afternoon, arranged carefully in the rough mass of a sleeping man of my build. Tom had helped me with the weight distribution a fortnight earlier. On the pillow at the top, I had placed a gray wool beanie pulled down to where my ear would have been. Nigel stood there for almost a full minute. Then he leaned down, pressed 2 fingers against where my neck would have been, held them there, and finally nodded. He went to work. He pulled my oilskin coat and my tramping boots from the cupboard, dressed the weighted bundle in them, heaved the whole lot up onto his shoulder with some visible effort, and carried it out of the hut to his 4-wheel drive. I watched him on the outside cameras. He loaded the bundle into the passenger seat, buckled the seatbelt across it like you'd buckle in a sleeping child, got in, and drove. I knew exactly where he was going because I'd fitted a tracker to the underside of his rear bumper 3 weeks earlier. He drove 7 kilometers up a gravel 4-wheel drive track that climbs toward the old musterer's route above the Reese. Dense beech forest, no cell coverage, snow falling steadily. No other vehicles would pass until springtime. He stopped, got out, opened the passenger door, and lifted the bundle. It was at that moment that he realized the weight distribution was wrong, that the shape gave too easily under his hands, that the boots at the bottom of the bag were empty. According to the GPS log, he sat in that vehicle on that gravel track for 14 minutes without moving. The engine idling, the snow piling up on the windscreen. Then he turned around and drove back. When his headlights swung into the hut driveway at 1 minute past 2 in the morning, every light in the hut was on. Every single one. And I was standing on the front veranda in my heavy oilskin, the one Margaret had bought me for our 40th wedding anniversary, the one that had been hanging by the back door the entire time he thought I was dead. I was holding a mug of tea. Standing beside me in the pool of porch light were Tom Rangihow and 2 uniformed officers from the Queenstown section, with Detective Sergeant Tuho a pace behind them. Nigel stopped the vehicle. He sat there in the driver's seat for perhaps 20 seconds. I could see his face quite clearly through the windscreen, lit pale by the porch floods. The color went out of him the way water goes out of a sink when you pull the plug. White. Absolutely white. He opened the door slowly. He stepped down into the snow. He looked at me and said, "Dad, how? You were meant to." "How? I was meant to be dead," I said. "I know. Dad, I can. There's been. It isn't what you. It's exactly what I think, son. I have every word of it." Detective Sergeant Tuho stepped forward. "Nigel Whitley, I'm arresting you on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to murder, obtaining by deception, and forgery. You're not obliged to say anything, but anything you do say may be used in evidence." He didn't resist. He didn't even seem to hear her. He kept looking at me with an expression I hope I never have to see on another living human face. Half horror, half a kind of dawning recognition. The expression of a man who has just understood that he has been outmaneuvered for months by a person he assumed could no longer matter. They put him in the back of the patrol car. The red taillights disappeared down the gravel road into the snow. Priscilla was arrested at Lake Hayes 5 hours later. She was packing, naturally, all 17 suitcases. She was going to run, but she hadn't been fast enough. The trial began in the High Court at Invercargill in the November following. 5 months later, Priscilla had opted for a separate trial. Nigel's ran first. The Crown was led by a prosecutor named Dhruv Naidu, a man in his early 40s who'd cut his teeth in Auckland and who had the kind of quiet, precise courtroom manner that experienced judges love. The evidence he led was, in Annette's words afterwards, the cleanest case file I have ever seen presented in a New Zealand courtroom. 18 weeks of video and audio, GPS data showing the drive up the Rhys Valley on a -3-degree night with a weighted bundle in the passenger seat. Lab analysis confirming zopiclone concentration in the thermos at roughly 6 times a therapeutic dose. Phone records linking Priscilla to the struck-off solicitor Gerald Hobbs. Bank records showing the $41,000 of unauthorized charges. Tom Rangihau's written observations. My own testimony, 3 full days on the stand. The defense did what they could. Nigel's barrister argued that the recordings were unlawfully obtained. The judge, the Honorable Justice Weaver, shut that down inside an hour. Citing Section 216B of the Crimes Act and the one-party consent principle, they argued the zopiclone concentration could have been an accidental contamination. Dhruv walked the toxicologist through the maths until even the jury was nodding along. They tried the argument that Priscilla was the true architect and Nigel had been manipulated. And there was some truth in that. She was. But here's the hard thing about manipulation. It is never in itself a defense. Nigel crushed the tablet. Nigel stirred it into my tea with his own hand. Nigel lifted a bundle he believed was his father's unconscious body onto his shoulder and carried it to his vehicle and drove it up a mountain road in the snow. No one put a gun to his head at any stage. Every one of those actions was a decision. And every decision was made by a grown man of 41. The jury was out for a day and a half. Nigel was found guilty on all 4 counts. Priscilla, tried 6 weeks later before a different jury, was found guilty on all identical counts, plus an additional charge of attempting to pervert the course of justice relating to the Hobbs approach. Sentencing took place in mid-February, in the same High Court room at Invercargill. Justice Weaver is a man of few wasted words. He looked down at the two of them, standing side by side in the dock for the sentencing hearing, and he said that in his 34 years on the bench, he had rarely encountered a more premeditated, sustained, and morally bankrupt attempt on a parent's life. He sentenced Nigel to 17 years imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years, and Priscilla to 18 years with a minimum non-parole period of 11. Reparation was set at just under $500,000, which would follow them as a civil debt for the rest of their natural lives. After the sentencing, as the corrections officers were leading them out, I stood up from the public gallery and walked across to the dock. I'm within my rights to do that, and I did it slowly and deliberately. Nigel looked up at me. He didn't say anything. I looked at him. This person I had once taught to tie his shoelaces and to say please and thank you and to shake hands properly. And I said, I want you to know what happens now. The house at Lake Hayes is under contract as of last week. $3.8 million. The Invercargill villa is going on the market in March. Every dollar you tried to take from me, every cent you would have let me freeze to death for in the Rhys Valley, is going to be donated. The bulk of it to the Alzheimer's Society of New Zealand in your mother's name. The rest to a legal fund I've established for elderly New Zealanders who are being financially exploited by their own families. I'm keeping enough to live modestly, and I'm leaving a proper provision for your sister's boys. You and Priscilla will not see a cent of any of it. Ever. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. 17 years, son. I hope you use them to become someone your mother would have recognized. I turned and walked out of the courtroom. The properties sold within 4 months. Lake Hayes went for 3.8. Invercargill went for 930. After taxes, legal fees, and the reparation paid forward, I was sitting on just over $3.5 million. I kept $400,000, which bought me a modest two-bedroom cottage on a quiet street in Oamaru, not far from the Victorian precinct, with a north-facing garden and a view of a single old oak tree that turns every color of gold in the autumn. I donated $1.5 million to the Alzheimer's Society. I donated another $1 million to the legal fund, which I named the Margaret Whitley Trust, and which is now operating out of an office in Wellington and taking referrals from 7 different community law centers around the country. The final $550,000 went into a trust for Helena's boys' university education. Because Helena never asked, never schemed, never pried, and raising 2 good kids who are kind to their granddad is the only inheritance worth anything in this world. Helena flew down from Wellington to help me move into the cottage. She brought the boys. They helped carry boxes and argued about which bedroom they'd take when they came to stay. And my grandson James found the chess set Margaret had bought me for our 30th anniversary at the bottom of one of the crates, and asked me if I'd teach him to play. I said I would. As Helena was leaving, she hugged me on the front step and said, "You did the right thing, Dad. All of it." "I know, love. Do you miss him?" I thought about that for a long moment. The way you have to think about questions like that if you want to give an honest answer. I thought about the 6-year-old who used to fall asleep on my chest. I thought about the 16-year-old who cried in my arms the night his first girlfriend broke up with him. I thought about the 21-year-old who shook my hand at his graduation at Otago and said he could never have done it without me. "I miss the boy he was," I said. "The man he became? I don't. Not for 1 minute." She kissed my cheek and got in the car. I started playing chess again seriously after that. Online mostly, against strangers from Iceland and Argentina and Japan. Margaret used to beat me 3 games out of 5. I've never quite told anyone that. There's something about chess that's been good for me in the years since. The patience of it. The way you can't think only about the move in front of you, but have to see 3 and 4 and 5 moves ahead and know what your opponent is capable of even when they don't know themselves. About 14 months after the sentencing, I received a letter with a Rimutaka prison postmark. Inside, on a single sheet of lined paper, in Nigel's handwriting, were 4 words. "I understand now. Sorry." I read it twice. I folded it. I put it in the drawer of my desk next to Margaret's reading glasses and a little punamu carving Helena had given me for my 60th birthday. I haven't written back. Not yet. Maybe one day. The wound has scarred over now, but it hasn't healed. Not properly. And I'm not sure it ever fully will. That's all right. Some things aren't meant to heal all the way. Some things are meant to remind you. A former colleague from Christchurch rang me a fortnight ago and asked what I was up to these days. I told him about the cottage, the chess, the garden, the grandchildren who come down from Wellington in the school holidays. He said, "It sounded like a good life." I said it was. "I want to leave you with a few things, if you'll indulge an old detective for a moment longer. Because this story isn't really about me, or about Nigel. It's about what can happen to any of us. And about what we can do to keep ourselves standing. Keep your affairs in order. Know where your will is. Who holds a copy. Who is authorized to act for you, and who is not. Review it every few years. Do not leave it in a drawer that anyone in your house can get to. Pay attention to the small signals. The drawer slightly out of place. The bank statement opened and resealed. The unfamiliar charge on the card. People who mean you harm almost always telegraph it in small ways, long before they act. Trust your gut. You have earned it with every year you've lived. Keep at least one person outside your household who knows what's going on in your life. One trusted friend. One solicitor. One adult child who lives somewhere else. Loneliness is what predators feed on. Do not let yourself become isolated. Because isolation is the room in which bad things are decided. Love your children. Love them fully and without reserve. But remember that loving someone does not mean you owe them anything they have not earned. And it certainly does not mean you must stay silent when they show you who they really are. A parent's love is not a blank check, and it is not a suicide note. And the last thing, which I offer for whatever it's worth from a man who's made more than his share of mistakes. Be the kind of person your spouse would still recognize if they could see you now. Margaret would have known exactly what I did and why I did it, and she would have poured me a whiskey and said, "Good on you, love." That's who she was. That's the person I try to be. On the days when I don't entirely feel like it. I took a sip of my tea this morning, clean and hot, poured by my own hand, and watched the first light come up over the oak tree in the garden. The leaves are turning. Winter's coming on. Another one. The game goes on. It always does. And you, sitting wherever you're sitting and listening to an old man tell an old story, you play your game well. Play it kindly, but play it with your eyes open.